Oh honey. The morning I realized my own children had trapped me in my own home, I felt a kind of fear I didn't know the human heart could carry. Imagine being 82 years old, standing in front of a front door you've opened for over 5 decades, only to find it locked from the outside. Imagine pressing your trembling hands to the glass, calling out to anyone who might hear, only for the world to say you were imagining it. Hello there, dear. Let me settle myself a bit. My name is Ruth Eleanor Whitaker, and yes, I'm 82, going on 83 this spring if the good Lord allows. I don't usually talk about things this heavy, but today I'm finally ready to open a chapter of my life I tucked away because it hurt too much to look at. If you're visiting me for the first time, go ahead and press that little subscribe button. I might be old, but I've got plenty of life left in these stories. If you're one of my returning sweethearts, bless your heart for stopping by again. Leave me a comment too, tell me your name and where you're listening from. I like to picture you all sitting right here in my little living room as I share these memories. Now that we're settled, let's turn back the pages. Way back. Because this story didn't begin with locks or accusations. It began in a world filled with warm kitchens, young laughter, and a love so steady and true that I thought nothing in this world could touch it. I grew up in a soft little corner of rural Virginia, where the summers smelled like warm peaches and the winters tasted like wood smoke from every neighbor's chimney. Back then, people waved at each other without thinking, and every porch had a swing or a rocking chair. The kind of place where time moved slowly, sweetly, like molasses on a warm biscuit. I met my husband, Albert Whitaker, in 1958 at the county fair. He was working the ring toss booth, wearing suspenders and a grin so easy and open-hearted you could fall right into it. I remember the smell of kettle corn drifting through the air and the sound of laughter rising above the rides. Albert had strong hands and warm hazel eyes that made you feel safe just by looking into them. He won me a stuffed rabbit that night. I still have it. It sits right on the shelf behind my rocker chair. We married the following spring. My dress was simple but lovely, white cotton with lace around the sleeves, sewn by my own mama. I carried a bouquet of freshly picked dogwood blossoms, and Albert wore a suit he borrowed from his brother. We didn't have money, but my goodness, we had joy. We built a life in a small 2-bedroom house just outside of town. It had wooden floors that creaked at night, a screen door that slapped shut no matter how gently you tried to hold it, and a kitchen that always smelled like something baking: bread, pies, cinnamon rolls, you name it. We had 2 children. Sarah, born in 1961 with red curls and dimples just like my mama, and Michael, born in 1964, quiet and serious like his daddy but with my stubborn streak. Our home was full of noise, full of love, full of the kind of everyday miracles you only appreciate once they're gone. Albert worked as a mechanic at a little family-owned shop. He'd come home with grease under his nails and the faint scent of motor oil on his clothes, and I swear even that smell became part of the rhythm of our life. He'd sit at the kitchen table, wipe his brow and say, "Ruth, there's nothing in this world better than coming home to you." I believed him. He made me believe in simple, powerful goodness. We had traditions. Friday night fish fry. Saturday morning pancakes. Sunday afternoons sitting on the porch listening to the radio. Summers at the lake. Christmases with homemade fudge and hand-sewn stockings. Life had a heartbeat then. A steady one. Strong and sure. But time can be cruel. Albert passed in 1985, sudden and shocking, a heart attack while he was out fixing a tractor on Old Mill Road. One minute he was tightening a bolt, the next he was gone. Losing him was like losing the sun. Everything dimmed. Everything chilled. But I kept going. For the children. For the home we built. For the memories that held me upright when grief threatened to knock the breath right from my lungs. The years rolled on. Sarah married a banker and Michael moved to North Carolina with his wife. They visited at first, often enough to keep me smiling. But life pulls people in different directions, sweetheart. Phone calls grew shorter. Visits grew farther apart. And little by little, their worry for me turned into something else. Not care. Not concern. Control. You don't realize the shift when it's happening. Not when it's your own babies. Not when your heart is full of love and trust. But if I could go back and whisper something to my younger self, I would say, "Ruth, pay attention. Watch closely. The signs are coming." Because before the day the locks appeared, before the windows were sealed, before my voice was dismissed as imagining things, there were small clues. Small changes. small shadows stretching long across the floorboards of my quiet little home. And that is where our story truly begins. Now listen closely, darling, because what I'm about to tell you isn't loud or dramatic. It didn't come crashing down like a storm. No, the beginning of my trouble crept in quiet, soft as dust settling on a forgotten shelf. People always think that being trapped must start with banging doors or shouting. But that's not how it happens. It begins with doubt. With someone questioning your reality little by little, until suddenly your whole world doesn't feel like your own anymore. After Albert passed in 1985, I stayed in our home just like he would have wanted. I kept the garden tidy, baked my bread every morning, and walked down to the post office 3 times a week. My life was quieter, sure, but it was mine. For years, everything moved peacefully. Then slowly, ever so slowly, things began to shift. Started with Sarah, my daughter. She was always the more anxious one. Sweet but tightly wound, like she was born with a clock inside her ticking too fast. One winter afternoon she visited unexpectedly. She walked through my door with that same brisk energy she had as a child, carrying 2 grocery bags. "Mom, you really shouldn't be driving alone anymore," she said before I even had my coat off. Now mind you, at that time I was 77. My eyesight was good. My hands were steady. I'd been driving the same route to the market for 40 years. So I frowned a bit and asked, "Whatever makes you say that, darling?" She sighed, one of those quick, clipped sighs, and started unpacking the groceries like she lived there. "You told me last week that you misplaced your car keys for a whole day." I laughed. "Honey, I misplaced the flour scoop for 3 days once. Doesn't mean I shouldn't be baking." But she didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She didn't even look at me. She just said, "I'm serious, Mom." That was the first moment, tiny as a raindrop, when I felt something shift. Like I was being moved from the category of mother to the category of burden. But I brushed it off. Mothers always do. Michael's distance. My son Michael had always been the quiet type. Thoughtful. Careful with his words. But after he moved to North Carolina, his calls changed tone too. "Mom, you sure you're eating enough? Mom, maybe it's time to get someone to stay with you. Mom, you're not forgetting things, are you?" It didn't matter what I told him. If I said I was fine, he said I was downplaying. If I mentioned anything slightly inconvenient like a blown fuse or a stiff knee, he acted like it was proof I needed monitoring. Monitoring. What a cold, clinical word. But again, I let it go. I wanted to believe my children loved me. That they were simply worried. That this was all normal. But sweetheart, love and control can look awfully similar if you're not paying attention. The mysterious key incident. One morning I went to unlock the back door to let some fresh air in. I always did that, Albert used to say. "Let the day in, Ruth. Keeps the ghosts of yesterday from piling up." But when I turned the key, something was wrong. It didn't feel familiar. It didn't slide smoothly. I leaned closer and noticed the lock cylinder looked different. Shinier. Newer. I puzzled over it. I certainly hadn't changed the lock. Later that week, Sarah came over again. I mentioned it lightly, casually, just to make conversation. She froze. Just for a fraction of a second. But I saw it. "Oh, yeah. I asked a locksmith to update the back door," she said, waving her hand like it was no big deal. I blinked at her. "Without telling me?" "It's for your safety, Mom. Anyone could get in through an old lock." "But it's my house," I said gently. "I know," she replied. "And I'm helping you protect it." The conversation ended there, but something inside me tightened. It was the first time someone had made a decision about my home without even asking me. A tiny warning bell chimed in my heart. The doctor's visit. A month later, Sarah insisted on taking me to my annual physical. She sat beside me in the doctor's office, answering questions before I could open my mouth. She forgets things sometimes. She mixed up a date recently. She gets confused. I stared at her, stunned. What was she talking about? I had written one appointment wrong in my calendar, one. And suddenly she was painting me as if my mind was slipping like wet laundry on a line. The doctor gave me that look. The one that's half concern, half dismissal. The look people reserve for the elderly, the fragile, the slipping. "Honey," I said on the drive home, "you made me sound like I'm losing myself." She gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Mom, I'm trying to help you." That was the second major crack in the foundation. Small but growing. The house felt different. Over the next few months, I began noticing small changes around the house. My pills moved to a different shelf. The blankets folded in a way I didn't fold them. Food items rearranged. The thermostat set lower than I ever set it. At first I wondered if I was simply tired. Or distracted. Or remembering wrong. No. I knew my own home. Every quirk. Every creak. Every habit. Something or someone was shifting things. Whenever I asked Sarah or Michael about it, they brushed me off. Mom, you probably forgot you moved it. Maybe you're mixing things up. You're just tired. But I wasn't. Not then. Those little changes were like crumbs leading through a forest I didn't yet realize I was lost in. And then came the day. One afternoon I reached for my front door to check the mail. I twisted the knob. It didn't budge. The lock was engaged. From the outside. A chill went straight through me. Not because of the door itself, but because something deep inside whispered. This isn't an accident. I pressed my palm to the wood. The house was silent. Too silent. And for the first time I felt a tremor of fear. A small one, but enough to make my breath catch. I didn't know it yet, sweetheart. But this was the beginning of the nightmare. The beginning of being dismissed. Being doubted. Being trapped. Not by strangers. Not by enemies. But by the two people I brought into this world with my own hands. I remember the morning it all turned from uneasy discomfort into a cold, unmistakable truth. The kind that settles deep in your stomach and refuses to leave. The kind that whispers, "You are no longer safe in your own home, Ruth." It was early spring 1986. The air smelled faintly of thawing earth and the sweet hint of the lilac bush Albert planted the year we bought the house. That bush had bloomed every year without fail, filling the backyard with a scent that reminded me of our wedding day. I always cracked the kitchen window open for that first scent of spring. It made me feel young again. But that morning when I went to open the window, it was already opened an inch. I never left it open at night. Albert used to tease me for locking up the house as if we lived in a fortress. Yet there it was, pushed up just enough to send a thread of cold morning air drifting across the sink. A strange detail, but not enough to alarm me. Maybe I had been distracted the night before. I closed it gently. Still, something in the back of my mind tugged, like a child pulling at their mother's apron. Something wasn't right. I went to the front door to check the mail, and again the lock felt unfamiliar. Stiff. Resistant. As if it had been recently tampered with. When I finally pried it open, no mail sat in the box. That wasn't unusual, just disappointing. I still loved receiving letters from my sister Margaret, even though she only wrote a few times a year now. I stepped outside for a moment, letting the sunlight warm my cheeks. The neighborhood was quiet except for Mrs. Donaldson sweeping her porch across the street. She looked up, squinting behind those thick glasses of hers, and waved. I waved back. For a moment I felt normal, as if everything was fine. But the uneasiness didn't fade. It followed me back into the house like a shadow slipping across the floor. Around noon the phone rang. I answered with the usual, "Hello?" and braced myself for another lecture from either Sarah or Michael. But it wasn't them. Instead, it was a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Porter, a social worker from the county office. My heart jolted in confusion. I had never met her, never requested her, never needed her. She spoke in a soft, too-patient tone, the way people speak to children or people twice their age. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, "we've been informed that you may be in need of support services. I'd love to schedule a home visit." I cut her off. "Me? Support services?" I felt my cheeks heating with surprise and embarrassment. "Who told you that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She dodged the question like a politician. "We just want to make sure you're safe, Mrs. Whitaker. That everything in your home environment is appropriate." Appropriate. My home. The same home I raised 2 children in. The same home I painted, scrubbed, and cherished for over 4 decades. I told her firmly that no visit was necessary. She seemed hesitant but politely ended the call. When I hung up, my hands shook. Someone had reported me. Someone had told them I needed supervision. Someone who believed, or wanted others to believe, that I couldn't manage my own life. I knew exactly who. That evening Sarah arrived. She let herself in with her copy of my key, something that had once comforted me but now felt like a violation, and found me sitting at the table with my hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. She smiled far too brightly, the kind of smile people put on when they're hiding something. "Mom, I bought you some groceries." She moved around the kitchen quickly, unloading items I hadn't asked for, reorganizing shelves that didn't need reorganizing. I watched in silence until she finally noticed my expression. "What's wrong?" she asked. I told her about the phone call. I watched her eyes flicker just for a second, before she forced her voice into that same bright, airy tone. "Oh, I see. Well, maybe someone in the neighborhood noticed something and got concerned." I leaned forward. "Sarah, did you call them?" She froze. Her fingers tightened around the jar of peanut butter she was holding. Then she sighed as if I was the one exhausting her. "Mom, you've been confused lately. You misplaced your medication last week. You thought someone had moved your blankets. You forgot the date of your appointment." "I mixed up one appointment," I snapped, my voice cracking. "One. And the medication was behind the toaster. You put it there when you reorganized the kitchen." She went quiet. Then she gave me that look. The look people give when they've already decided who you are and nothing you say will change their mind. "I'm only trying to help," she whispered. But her words didn't feel like help. They felt like walls going up around me. Later that evening I noticed something else wrong. The back door, the same one with the new lock, had an additional lock on the inside. A bolt. A bolt I had never installed. A bolt placed high, too high for someone of my height to comfortably reach, as if designed not for convenience, but restriction. My breath caught. The house suddenly felt smaller. The walls closer. The silence heavier. Had they been making changes while I slept? While I was out in the garden? While I was distracted? The next morning things only grew worse. I tried to call Margaret, but the phone line crackled so badly I couldn't hear her at all. When I hung up and checked the wiring near the baseboards, the cord looked bent, twisted unnaturally. Like someone had tampered with it. My heart began pounding. Every corner of the house felt wrong, shifted, altered, touched by hands that were not mine. By afternoon I discovered something that made my blood run cold. My bedroom window, the one above the rose bushes, had a small latch installed at the top. A child-proof latch. Something meant to prevent anyone from opening it more than a few inches. My own window. My own room. My own air restricted. That was the moment I realized. This wasn't worry. This wasn't care. This wasn't love wrapped in caution. This was control. Slow, creeping, tightening control. And I felt it closing in around me like a cage. Sweetheart. That was the day I understood something dangerous was happening. But the worst part wasn't the locks. Or the phone line. Or even the new bolt on the door. It was that no matter what I said, no matter what I noticed, no matter how frightened I became, no one believed me. Not a soul. I wish I could tell you that after realizing something was wrong, I marched straight into the truth and confronted everything head-on. But when you're an older woman, when your hair is white and your hands shake just a little when you button your sweater, the world doesn't meet your fear with seriousness. It meets it with patronizing smiles and soft voices meant for toddlers. The next few weeks felt like sinking into quicksand. Every time I tried to pull myself out, someone's disbelief dragged me back under. It was a Thursday when I decided I couldn't keep the fear inside any longer. I walked to Mrs. Donaldson's house across the street, clutching my coat tight around me even though the air was warm. She'd known me for 40 years. Surely she would understand. She invited me in for tea, her house smelling like cinnamon and the old potpourri she kept in a crystal bowl on her coffee table. I sat there, taking a steadying breath before I told her everything about the locks, the phone line, the strange changes in the house. She listened politely, nodding gently, stirring her tea in slow, deliberate circles. But when I finished, her expression shifted into that sorrowful, faraway look people get when they don't believe you but don't want to say it. "Oh, Ruth," she said softly, her voice dipped in sympathy. "Losing Albert must have been harder on you than you realized." I blinked at her, stunned. "This isn't grief," I insisted. "Someone is tampering with my house. Someone is making changes without my consent." She reached across the table and patted my hand as if calming an upset child. "Your children just want the best for you," she said gently. "Maybe they think you need help." That sentence nearly broke me. Because it didn't matter how rational, how detailed, how certain I was, people heard my age louder than they heard my words. The next person I tried was the pastor from our church. He stopped by occasionally after Albert passed, and he had always been kind. When I explained my fears, his eyebrows creased, but not in alarm, in pity. "Ruth," he began, folding his hands, "sometimes our minds play tricks on us when we're alone too much." I felt heat rise behind my eyes, not anger exactly, but helplessness so heavy it left a physical ache in my chest. "My mind is fine," I said, my voice trembling. "Something is happening and I need someone to believe me." But he simply murmured, "I'll pray for clarity and peace in your home." Clarity and peace. Not safety. Not action. Not belief. When I got home that day, a small white card was tucked into my screen door. It was from the same social worker, Dr. Porter, the one who'd called earlier. "We'd like to follow up regarding your home evaluation. Please call." My jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. Someone was escalating this. Someone was painting me as incapable, as unstable. And the more I fought it, the more desperate and unbalanced I must have looked to everyone around me. I decided to call my son Michael. Surely he'd listen. He had always been the logical one, the calmer one. When he picked up, his voice sounded distracted, as if he were busy. I told him everything quickly, trying not to sound frantic. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then he sighed. "Mom, you're worrying yourself sick over nothing." I protested, told him the locks had been changed, that the phone line had been disturbed, that I'd found a latch on my own bedroom window. "Mom," he said firmly, "you probably forgot approving the lock changes. Sarah said you've been confused lately." I nearly dropped the phone. "Confused?" I whispered. "I haven't been confused. I've been ignored." He didn't respond for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, colder. "I think you should let Sarah handle things for a while. She's closer. She sees your day-to-day." I felt the line crackle faintly again. "Michael," I said softly, "please. I'm telling you the truth. Something is happening and I'm scared." Another long silence. Then, "We'll talk later, Mom." And he hung up. That night, I cried into Albert's old pillow, the one that still held the faintest scent of cedar and aftershave. I felt like the world had tilted sideways and left me standing on uneven ground. My home, the place where I raised babies, cooked Sunday roasts, and stitched quilts while Albert read the paper, no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a place someone else was slowly claiming. Bit by bit. Decision by decision. Lock by lock. The next morning, I tried to take matters into my own hands. I went down to the police station. The officer at the front desk was young enough to be my grandson. When I told him that someone had been tampering with the locks in my home and entering without permission, he asked who else had keys. I told him about Sarah. That was my mistake. His whole demeanor shifted. He leaned back in his chair, sighed, and said, "Ma'am, it sounds like your children are helping you with safety measures. That's not a crime." "Without telling me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "They're locking doors I should have access to. Moving things. Controlling what I can open." He gave me a thin smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe they're worried about you living alone." His words were filled with dismissal, but the final blow came next. "We can't file a report on family helping with elder care." Elder care. That phrase stung more deeply than anything else. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't frail. I simply wanted control over my own home, my own life. When I returned home, trembling with frustration, I found something that made the floor seem to tilt beneath my feet. A note on the kitchen counter, written in Sarah's handwriting. "Mom, please don't go wandering off without telling me. It's not safe." Wandering off? I'd gone to the police, not wandered like a lost child. My legs felt weak. I sat at the table, the clock ticking loudly in the silent house. Every sound felt amplified, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft drip of the faucet, the creak of the floorboard under my foot. I wasn't imagining anything. My children were creating a story about me, a story where I was incapable, forgetful, unsafe. And everyone believed their story instead of mine. In that moment, the house didn't feel like mine at all. It felt like a place slowly closing in around me. A place where anything I did, any attempt to defend myself, would be twisted into evidence that I wasn't well. I felt watched even when no one was there. I felt dismissed even when I spoke clearly. I felt trapped long before the real trapping began. But worst of all was the loneliness. The bone-deep loneliness of knowing the world wouldn't listen. And the terrible whisper inside me saying, if they're willing to twist the truth, what will they do next? I didn't know it yet, but the day they truly trapped me was a slow, simmering thing, quiet at first, almost ordinary. The kind of day that fools you into thinking nothing bad could possibly happen because the sun is shining and the birds are out and the world looks far too peaceful for cruelty. But cruelty doesn't always look like a raised voice or a slammed fist. Sometimes it looks like concern. Sometimes it sounds like, "We're doing this for your own good." Sometimes it arrives in your own children's voices. It was a Sunday morning, bright and warm, the kind of morning Albert used to call a blessing in disguise, because the light made him feel 20 years younger. I made myself oatmeal with honey and sliced bananas, humming a little tune from an old Doris Day record. I remember feeling almost hopeful. Maybe things would settle down. Maybe Sarah and Michael would stop meddling. Maybe life would return to the steady rhythm I'd known for decades. But hope is such a fragile thing. It snaps easily. Sarah arrived around 10, letting herself in with her key. She carried a small, tight smile that didn't quite meet her eyes. "Morning, Mom," she chirped, too sweet, too rehearsed. Behind her came Michael, unexpected, stiff-backed, his eyes scanning the house like he was inspecting a crime scene. Immediately my stomach dropped. They never came together. Never. Not unless something serious was planned. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Well, this is a surprise," I said lightly. "Two children at once. Should I feel blessed or worried?" Sarah exchanged a look with Michael, a quick, silent look that told me everything I needed to know. Something was wrong. Something was coming. And they both knew exactly what it was. "Mom," Michael began, clearing his throat, "we need to talk." Those words. Those awful, heavy words. Nothing good ever follows them. Sarah reached out and touched my arm, guiding me, directing me toward the living room couch. I sat down slowly, watching the two of them stand over me like officials delivering a verdict. My hands trembled in my lap, but I clasped them tightly to hide it. Michael spoke first. "We've been talking with Dr. Porter." A chill ripped down my spine. "The social worker?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why?" Sarah stepped in. "Because we're worried about you. You've been confused. You've been forgetting things. You called the police last week." My breath caught. "I called because someone changed the locks on my home without my permission." "Mom," Sarah said gently, "we did that. For safety." "For whose safety?" I snapped. "Yours or mine?" They ignored the question. Michael took a breath. "We've made arrangements." My heart hammered in my chest. Arrangements for what? Sarah sat beside me, taking my hand in that soft, patronizing grip I'd come to dread. "Mom, we've decided you shouldn't be living alone anymore." I jerked my hand away. "You don't get to decide that." "We already have," Michael said quietly. For a moment, just a thin sliver of time, my vision blurred. The room darkened at the edges. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I looked at my children, the same two people I had nursed through fevers, defended in school meetings, fed, clothed, sacrificed for, and I didn't recognize them. Not one bit. I whispered, "You can't do this." Sarah exhaled slowly, as if preparing herself for a tantrum. "Mom, it's for your own good. Dr. Porter agrees you need supervision. So we've arranged for someone to come check in on you. Every day." I stared at her. "Check in? To do what?" "To make sure you're safe," Michael replied. "And to make sure you don't leave the house without someone knowing." I felt my heart stutter. "Leave the house? Are you saying I can't leave my own home?" "No one's saying that," Sarah insisted, but her tone was too smooth, too practiced. "We just need to know where you are. You worry us when you wander." "I did not wander," I hissed. "I walked to the police station because you two are interfering with my life." Michael's jaw tightened. "You see, this is exactly what we're talking about. You're overreacting." Overreacting. A word meant to silence women for generations. A word used to erase my voice. I stood up, slowly, deliberately. "Get out of my house," I said, pointing to the door. But neither of them moved. Sarah's eyes hardened with a kind of cold determination I had never seen before. "Mom, we've already changed the locks. You won't be able to leave without the caretaker's key." My body froze. My breath turned thin as paper. "What do you mean?" I whispered. Michael pulled a small silver key from his pocket, the same key I hadn't recognized in my own lock. "This is the only way out now," he said. "For your safety." The world tilted. My knees weakened. The air felt too thick to breathe. "You locked me in," I said, barely able to form the words. "You locked your own mother inside her home." They didn't look guilty. They looked justified. Sarah placed a hand on my shoulder. "Mom, please don't make this harder. We're doing what we need to do. I slapped her hand away. No. You're doing what you want. Not what I need. Michael exhaled sharply. We'll come by later with groceries. Try to rest. And with that they walked out my door and locked it behind them. I ran to the knob, twisting it desperately. It wouldn't budge. I yanked it harder until my wrists ached. Let me out. I screamed. This is my house. Let me out. But their footsteps faded. Their car doors slammed. And the engine roared to life. I was alone. Trapped. Locked inside my own home like a prisoner. My knees gave out and I sank to the floor, trembling. The house felt smaller than ever, every corner a reminder of what had just happened. My own children had taken my freedom, stripped me of dignity, decided my fate without my consent. And the worst part? I knew that if I told anyone they would say the same thing. Ruth, you must be imagining it. But I wasn't imagining anything. I wasn't confused. I wasn't lost. I was trapped. And no one believed me. I wish I could tell you, dears, that once I confronted my children, my own flesh and blood, everything became clearer, kinder, or at least manageable. But the truth is that confrontation marked the beginning of the darkest stretch of my life. I still remember the silence that hung in the house afterward. It felt heavy, humid like the air before a storm. My children hardly spoke to me for the first couple of days, and when they finally did, their voices were clipped and oddly formal, as if I were some distant relative visiting from out of town. But beneath that politeness was something colder. Resentment or maybe guilt, though at the time, guilt felt too hopeful a word to assume. I kept waiting for one of them to knock on my door and say, "Mama, we're sorry." But the knock never came. Instead, decisions were made without me, papers shuffled behind closed doors, bills were rerouted, and every time I asked for a simple update about finances or the house I was told, "Don't trouble yourself, Mom. We have it handled." Only it didn't feel like help. It felt like disappearance, like pieces of my life were being quietly erased. I noticed the money first. When Albert died, God rest his soul, he left a decent pension and some savings, nothing extravagant, but enough for me to live comfortably, keep the house in good repair and leave something meaningful behind. When I checked the account one chilly morning in early autumn, I stared at the numbers so long my hands went numb. The balance wasn't just lower. It was nearly drained. Thousands gone. At first I thought it was a mistake, banks made those from time to time and I was old enough to give grace before anger. But when I called the bank, the young man on the phone said, ever so politely, "Ma'am, the withdrawals were authorized." Authorized. As if I had somehow forgotten signing something. That word haunted me. I hung up, drifted to the kitchen table and sat there staring at Albert's empty chair. He would have known what to do, what to say. He always did. I pressed my palm to the seat, remembering the warm indentation where his weight used to be, and I whispered, "I'm trying, Al. I'm trying so hard." But grief doesn't answer back. And betrayal, well, betrayal stays quiet too. The hardest part wasn't the control itself. It wasn't even the loneliness that crept in like a cold draft through a house you once felt safe in. The hardest part was the moment people stopped believing me. Not strangers. Not people who barely knew my name. But people who had watched me live my life for decades. Neighbors who'd borrowed sugar from my kitchen. A pastor who had stood at my wedding altar and later prayed over Albert's casket. Even the pharmacist who had known my prescriptions by heart and once delivered medicine himself when I couldn't drive. These were people who had seen me strong, capable, steady. And yet, when I finally gathered the courage to speak, when I leaned in and said softly, "I think my children are taking advantage of me," the response was always the same. A soft, pitying smile. A slow nod meant to soothe, not hear. And then a sentence that gently erased my reality. "Maybe they're just trying to help, Ruth." Or, "You know, stress can make things feel different than they really are." Each time it felt like something inside me folded inward. I could almost feel myself shrinking under those smiles, becoming smaller, quieter, less solid. You don't know how humbling, no, how humiliating it is to be treated like a fragile vase with a crack only others can see. Like you're still standing in front of them, still breathing and speaking, but already dismissed as unreliable. The worst moment came on a day I hadn't prepared for, because how do you prepare for being doubted by the world? There was a knock at the door, firm and unexpected. When I opened it, a young woman stood there holding a clipboard, her smile careful, rehearsed. She introduced herself as a social worker. Someone, she explained gently, had reported concerns. Concerns about me. She used words like confused and anxious. She said someone was worried I might not be safe on my own. I didn't ask who had called. I didn't need to. She asked if she could check the house for safety concerns, and I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. She looked at the stairs, the bathroom, the kitchen. I followed behind her quietly, my hands folded together, my back straight, determined to show her I was still myself. At one point she reached out and gently touched my hand, like you might touch a nervous child, and said, "It's okay to feel overwhelmed at your age." My age. The words landed like a slap wrapped in velvet. As if aging were a sin. As if the lines on my face had erased a lifetime of memory, instinct, and judgment. I smiled. I answered her questions calmly. I kept my dignity. But inside something cracked. Not loudly. Not all at once. Just a thin hairline fracture. Enough to feel the break every time I breathed too deeply. That night marked the emotional low point, the one I still struggle to talk about without my throat tightening. I stood at my bedroom window staring out over the yard Albert and I had tended together for decades. The roses were blooming, the ones he planted for our 25th anniversary, insisting on beauty even when no one was looking. I could see the fence he built with his own hands, measuring twice, cursing softly when a board didn't sit right. Beyond it stood the maple tree our children used to swing from when they were little, their laughter ringing out until they tumbled into the grass, breathless and happy. That view should have anchored me. It should have reminded me who I was and where I belonged. Instead, I felt strangely unnecessary, like a ghost wandering through rooms that used to be mine. Downstairs, the house was full of noise, my children arguing about bills, schedules, responsibilities, but none of those sounds included my voice. They talked around me, over me, past me. The realization stung deeper than I expected. I was living in my own home, yet I had been demoted to a guest. And not a welcomed one. I sat on the edge of my bed that night and whispered into the quiet, "Is this what it all comes to, God? After a whole lifetime of loving people?" And I cried, not loudly, not dramatically, but the quiet kind of crying that sinks into your chest and burns from the inside out. What made everything worse wasn't physical force. There were no locks on the doors. No chains on my wrist. It was control dressed up as care, manipulation wrapped in concern. Keys began disappearing, always explained away as misplaced. If someone stopped by unexpectedly, my children would tell them I was resting. They started handling all my phone calls, saying people had been worried about scams and that they were just protecting me. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that they were only trying to help. But little by little, the pattern became impossible to ignore. I would ask to visit an old friend, and suddenly the car wasn't working. I would ask for a ride to church, and my daughter would remind me of a doctor's appointment I didn't remember scheduling. Days bled together in a strange haze of isolation and polite dismissal. Some mornings I woke up feeling strong enough to fight, to speak up, to demand answers. Other mornings I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Then the financial stress crept in, quiet at first, then relentless. The bank account thinned. Bills piled up. They pressured me to cut back, to cancel the newspaper, reduce heating costs, skip hair appointments, stop buying certain groceries. My daughter even suggested selling a few heirlooms for safekeeping, assuring me it would only be temporary. The thought of parting with Albert's watch or my mother's jewelry made my stomach twist. Those weren't just objects. They were memories. Proof that my life had mattered. I felt hunted by desperation, like the walls were closing in inch by inch. The woman I had been, organized, capable, sharp, felt like she was slipping away. Not because of age, but because the people around me were chiseling away my independence piece by piece. And yet, somehow I kept going. Not because I felt brave. I didn't. But because something deep inside me refused to let them erase me completely. Even on nights when I felt trapped, in the house and in my own life, I held on to a tiny flame of stubbornness. I didn't have a plan yet. I didn't have a clear way out. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Albert would never have wanted me to surrender. And so I didn't. I stayed quiet when I needed to. I observed. I listened. I gathered strength in small, private moments. I waited. Because even the most fragile-seeming grandmother has limits, and I was getting dangerously close to mine. Looking back now, I can't pinpoint the exact moment when everything inside me shifted. It wasn't grand or cinematic. There was no swelling music, no dramatic confrontation. It was more like an ember catching fire after smoldering for far too long. A whisper inside me saying, "Ruth, they may doubt your mind, but you still have your spirit." My turning point came one early winter morning when the house was silent. I woke before dawn, the sky still dark and bruised. I shuffled into the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, chamomile, the one my daughter kept insisting I didn't need anymore. I sat at the table and let the quiet hold me the way Albert used to. And as I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, a single thought came so clearly it felt as though someone else had placed it gently in my mind. "You're still here, Ruth. You still have a say." My children thought they were the only ones capable of making decisions, the only ones with access to information, the only ones who understood what was best for me. But they had forgotten something essential. I had lived a full life before they were even born. I had navigated hardships, learned skills, survived losses they couldn't imagine. And I had something they could never take from me: experience. Real, earned, deeply lived experience. That morning I started writing. Not a diary, at least not at first, but a list. A list of what I still controlled. What I remembered. What I owned. What was legally and unquestionably mine. And seeing it all on paper felt like watching sunlight slip into a dark room. I wasn't as powerless as they wanted me to feel. I wasn't even close. From there I began rebuilding myself in small, steady steps. I started reading again old books I loved, mysteries and historical novels that reminded me of the woman I used to be. I practiced recalling details from my childhood, things I hadn't thought of in years: the smell of my mother's gingerbread at Christmas, the way Albert's hands looked when he worked on the fence, the sound of my children's laughter when they were still innocent and loving. Strength grows from remembrance. It grows from reclaiming the pieces of yourself that others try to bury. Slowly I felt my clarity returning. Then my confidence. Then my voice. One of the most pivotal moments came midweek while my daughter was sorting through the mail. She had started opening everything addressed to me, deciding what I did and didn't need to see. That day she slipped. A small envelope fell to the floor as she walked away. I recognized my name immediately, written in a familiar hand. My older cousin Mabel, who lived 3 towns over. That woman had been my rock through so much of my early life, even if time and distance had pulled us apart. The letter itself was simple. He asked how I was doing. Said she'd been thinking of me. Invited me to visit whenever I felt up to it. But the impact of it was tremendous. Because it reminded me I wasn't alone. There were still people outside this house who cared. People who remembered me, really remembered me. People whose opinions weren't clouded by greed or convenience. That letter was a lifeline. And I clung to it with both hands because in that moment, it felt like proof that I still existed beyond the narrow version of me others were trying to impose. And if you're listening to this, sweetheart, I want you to understand something I learned the hard way. Your voice does not expire with age. Your truth does not fade because time has passed. And no one, no matter how close they are to you, gets to erase you while you're still breathing. In the days that followed, I began making plans so quietly that even the walls couldn't hear them. I moved like a shadow through my own life, careful not to disturb the fragile illusion my children had built around me. I found my old address book one afternoon while they were out, the very one my son had told me was misplaced. I recognized the faded blue cover immediately, the soft bend in the spine from years of being tucked into purses and kitchen drawers. I hid it between my mattress and the box spring, sliding it there like a secret heartbeat. Each night, I pulled it out and memorized phone numbers the way I used to when I was a girl, whispering them under my breath until they stitched themselves back into my mind. Numbers are funny that way. People assume you forget them with age, but once they settle into your bones, they never really leave. It was during one of those quiet afternoons that I found the spare key to the garden shed. It was tucked into the pocket of Albert's old fishing jacket, the one that still smelled faintly of lake water and pipe tobacco. I pressed my face into the fabric for a moment longer than necessary, letting the familiar scent steady me. The shed itself hadn't been touched in years. Inside were tools, dusty boxes, and memories layered like sediment. But what mattered most sat quietly on a shelf behind old canning jars and coiled hoses. A small shoebox. I nearly laughed when I opened it, a breathless, disbelieving sound. Inside was cash. Not much, but enough. Rainy day money, Albert had always called it. He believed in preparation. In keeping something back for storms you couldn't yet see. And oh Albert, what a storm I had walked into. That money wasn't a fortune, but it was freedom in paper form. It was proof that my past self had known I might need help someday, even if my present self had forgotten. With that discovery, something inside me shifted again. The plans grew sharper, more practical. I began rebuilding my confidence in small, tangible ways. I fixed things around the house, quietly undoing the narrative that I was helpless. A loose kitchen knob tightened beneath my fingers. A flickering lamp steadied. A broken hinge on the laundry door creaked back into place. My children had insisted on doing everything for me, hovering like I might shatter if handed a tool. But my hands remembered. They always had. And every time I finished a task, I felt a small surge of pride ripple through me. A reminder whispered deep inside. You are still capable. You always were. Then I took it further. I pulled out Albert's old typewriter, the heavy one with the stubborn keys my daughter had once said was too confusing for me. I carried it into my room piece by piece, resting between trips, my arms aching but my spirit light. And then I began to type. Stories, memories, lessons, recipes written the way my mother taught me, with measurements learned by feel rather than spoons. I wrote about my childhood, about Albert, about the woman I had been before anyone decided I was inconvenient. I didn't know where the pages would go or if anyone would ever read them, but the sound of those keys striking paper felt like oxygen filling my lungs after months underwater. Writing gave me purpose, gave me proof, and for the first time in a long while I felt joy. Real joy. The kind that grows quietly until you realize you're smiling for no reason at all. My children noticed, of course they did. My daughter asked one evening, her voice too casual, "Mom, are you feeling okay? You seem busier lately." I smiled and stirred my soup slowly, deliberately. "I'm fine, dear. Just keeping myself occupied." Her eyes lingered on me a second longer than usual. "Easy. Kitten." She didn't push. Not yet. My son, though, grew more watchful. I caught him studying me when he thought I wasn't looking, his brow furrowed like he was trying to solve a problem that wouldn't sit still. Maybe he sensed I wasn't as pliable as before. Maybe he felt the balance shifting. But by then it no longer mattered. Something powerful had settled inside me. A steel spine I hadn't felt in years. A determination Albert used to call my quiet fire. And that fire was growing. I began taking longer walks, telling them I needed fresh air. In truth, I was mapping escape routes. I noted which neighbors were home at certain hours, which dogs barked, which windows glowed after dusk. I memorized the pattern of traffic on the main road, the timing of the bus, the sound of the crossing signal 2 blocks over. With every step, I felt my strength returning, my rhythm, my intuition. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was rebuilding, reclaiming, transforming. Deep in my heart, I knew the moment was coming when I would rise from the ashes they thought they had buried me in. There comes a moment in every woman's life when she understands the true cost of her silence. For me, it arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind where clouds hang low like heavy curtains and the air feels thick with things left unsaid. I had been rebuilding myself quietly, gathering clarity and strength piece by piece. But the more I rose, the tighter the tension became inside the house. My children didn't like my new energy, though they couldn't name why. They had grown comfortable with the weakened version of me, the woman they believed they could manage, control, and speak over. But I was no longer shrinking. And control, once challenged, always demands a response. It came sooner than I expected. An argument erupted downstairs, voices sharp and urgent. Money again. Bills. Responsibility. I stayed in my room listening, my hands resting calmly in my lap. For the first time, fear didn't rush in to meet the noise. Instead, I felt something steadier. Resolve. When my son finally stormed up the stairs and knocked on my door, not asking, just knocking once before entering, I knew the line had been crossed. He stood there, arms crossed, frustration etched into his face. He spoke to me like a child. Told me what would happen next. What they had decided. And as he talked, something inside me clicked into place. Clear. Calm. Unmovable. I let him finish. Then I stood. Fully. I looked him in the eyes and said quietly but firmly, "That won't be happening." The room went still. He laughed at first, a short, disbelieving sound. But when I didn't back down, when my gaze didn't waver, his laughter died. In that moment he realized something crucial. I was no longer afraid of him. And fear once gone is impossible to fake. What followed wasn't dramatic in the way stories like to pretend. There were no raised fists. No slammed doors. Just consequences unfolding one after another. Phone calls made from numbers they didn't know I had memorized. Conversations held with people they hadn't managed to isolate me from. Documents retrieved. Proof gathered. Allies found. I moved carefully, deliberately, every step anchored in preparation. When the time came, I left. Not in the middle of the night. Not in tears. I walked out the front door in daylight, my head high, carrying only what mattered. My papers. My writing. My dignity. Starting over at my age wasn't easy. It was frightening. Exhausting. But it was mine. And with every sunrise that followed, I felt lighter. Stronger. More myself than I had in years. I learned something vital through it all, something I want you to hear if you're listening. Aging does not make you invisible. Silence does. And the moment you decide to reclaim your voice, the world has no choice but to listen. It began so subtly that if I hadn't already been awake inside myself, I might have missed it. My daughter started hovering again, drifting into rooms where I was sitting quietly, pretending to tidy things that didn't need tidying. Her eyes followed me everywhere, measuring, watching, waiting. "Mom, you seem awfully restless lately," she said one afternoon, her voice syrupy with concern. "Maybe we should adjust your medicine." Medicine. Pills no doctor had prescribed, no diagnosis ever confirmed. Just little white tablets she claimed helped calm my nerves. For months I had swallowed them without protest, trusting her the way a mother trusts a child she raised with love. But that trust had thinned. So I began refusing them. Gently at first, with excuses. Then firmly. One evening, I placed the pill bottle back into her palm and said quietly, "I don't need these anymore, sweetheart." Her smile froze. Her jaw tightened. "Mom, you're getting confused again. Please don't start." But I didn't argue. I simply looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time she faltered. Because she saw it then, the clarity in my eyes, the strength she thought she'd erased. My son reacted differently. Where my daughter used emotion, he used authority. Control. One afternoon, he set his coffee mug down on the table with a sharp click that echoed through the kitchen. "Mom, from now on, you don't go outside alone," he said flatly. "We're responsible for you." Responsible. As though I were a child who couldn't be trusted to cross the street. As though my independence were dangerous. A slow heat rolled through my chest, but I kept my voice calm. "And who made that decision?" I asked. He stiffened. I could see it in his shoulders. Something was slipping. His grip on my life. The illusion that I would simply obey. The real fracture came a week later. I had been practicing independence quietly for months, writing, walking, fixing things, planning. But one afternoon, while I stood in the kitchen making a simple lunch, I heard whispering from the hallway. Hushed. Urgent. They didn't know I was just around the corner. My daughter's voice trembled. "She's getting worse." I found her in the shed again. My son's reply was cold, clipped. "Then we'll have to take more measures. If she can't understand what's best for her, we'll restrict access. Maybe even have someone check on her daily." There was a pause. "You mean professional care?" my daughter asked. "If necessary," he said. "Professional care." The words hit me like ice water. The kind of place where your voice doesn't matter. Where they smile politely while ignoring your protests. Where your world shrinks to a narrow bed and a schedule you don't choose. Well, I felt it then, clear as anything I'd ever known. Albert would never have let them do that to me. And I wouldn't either. That night I knew I had to move quickly. I waited until the house was truly still. I had learned their rhythms, the way the floors creaked under their weight, the difference between restless turning and deep sleep. Around midnight I rose. I dressed slowly, layering clothes against the cold, my hands steady, my heart calm. I slipped into the spare room where I'd hidden my essentials. The emergency money Albert saved, my cousin Mabel's letter, a few precious keepsakes. I tucked the shed key into my pocket. It wasn't fear guiding me. It was resolve. The kind that only comes when a woman understands that staying would cost her soul. I moved through the hallway like a shadow. The boards groaned softly. My son slept deeply. My daughter stirred once, and I froze, pressed against the wall until her breathing settled. At the back door, I paused only long enough to gather my courage. My fingers didn't shake as I turned the lock. The night air rushed in cold, sharp, honest. I stepped outside and something inside me lifted. For the first time in months, I felt alive. The escape wasn't dramatic. It was careful, thoughtful. I walked to the shed first, retrieved Albert's old lantern, its light faint but steady. Then I followed the side path toward the main road. The town slept, streetlights humming softly, a dog barking in the distance. My steps echoed against the pavement, measured and sure. My destination was Mabel's house, nearly an hour away on foot. The distance didn't frighten me. Women my age have walked farther through worse storms. I paced myself, stopping when the cold seeped too deeply into my bones. Somewhere along that road, beneath a sky bruised with early dawn, the world opened again. The horizon stretched wide. Possibility breathed. When Mabel opened her door, hair wild, robe loose, she gasped. "Ruth." I stepped inside, warmth wrapping around me like a blessing. I told her everything, not in frantic bursts but with tired, honest clarity. She held my hands, eyes shining with tears. "You're staying as long as you need," she said. And I knew she meant it. By morning, the consequences had begun. Calls, messages, panic, accusations. "Mom, you're confused. We were only trying to help. Why did you leave?" I didn't answer. Not yet. They needed to sit with what they'd done. Because for the first time in years I wasn't trapped. I was free. The years that followed softened the sharpest edges of betrayal. I built a small life for myself, quiet, honest, mine. A sewing business that paid the bills. A kitchen table with an uneven leg. Pride that hummed softly inside my chest. Healing wasn't straight. Some nights I still reached across the bed for Albert. Sometimes grief arrived unannounced. But I survived. I rebuilt. And if you're listening, sweetheart, take this with you. Silence has a cost. But so does freedom. And freedom is always worth it. The children, well, that part of my life never fit neatly into a single chapter. It was more like a thread that tangled, snapped, and then slowly, painfully was woven back into something new. For a long time after I left, they kept their distance. Weeks turned into months. Months into years. Guilt does that to people. So does fear. And shame is a heavy thing to carry, especially when it's earned. I learned not to chase them. Not because I didn't love them, but because healing cannot be forced. It has to arrive when the heart is ready to open its door. Life, though, has a way of surfacing truth, even when we try to bury it under years of silence. For us, it began with a letter. A plain white envelope slipped quietly under my door one autumn morning. No return address. Just my name written in handwriting I would recognize anywhere, my eldest daughter, Marlene. My fingers trembled as I held it, not from fear, but from the weight of what it might contain. Inside were only 3 sentences. No long explanations. No self-defense. Just, "Mom, I'm so sorry. For everything. Can we talk?" That was all. A small offering. A hand extended across a canyon we had both helped create. When she came by a week later, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked older somehow, like life had rushed ahead without asking permission. Her eyes carried a tiredness that hadn't been there before. She stood on my porch wringing her hands the way she used to when she was little and knew she'd done something wrong. We sat at my kitchen table for hours, tea growing cold between us, words coming slowly at first, then all at once. She told me things I wasn't prepared to hear, that fear had driven them, not cruelty. That someone had planted the idea I was becoming unstable, and once that seed took root, they fed it with worry instead of truth. They convinced themselves they were protecting me. It didn't excuse what they did. Not even close. But I heard the truth trembling beneath her words. And I understood something painful but important. Misguided love can wound far deeper than hatred ever could. The others returned more slowly. Not all at once. Not cleanly. Life rarely offers tidy reunions wrapped in bows. There were tense phone calls, long silences, conversations that ended in tears, and others that ended with nothing resolved at all. I didn't forgive them overnight. You can't rush forgiveness. Trust isn't something you rebuild like a birdhouse with a hammer and nails. It's more like stitching torn fabric. You go slowly, carefully, making sure each new thread can hold. And sometimes you have to undo a stitch and try again. Over time they saw the woman I had become. Not broken. Not confused. Strong. Independent. Standing firmly on her own feet. And I saw something in them too, real remorse. Not the convenient kind that disappears when things get uncomfortable, but the kind that sits heavy in the chest and humbles you. Piece by piece we found our way back to each other. Not to what we were before. That was gone. But to something different. Something honest. My grandchildren grew up knowing me not as the frail old woman their parents once whispered about, but as Grandma Ruth, the one who wore flour on her apron, baked biscuits on rainy mornings, and told stories that made the past feel alive. They sat cross-legged on my living room rug while I sewed, asking questions the way children do, curious, open, unburdened by judgment. I answered honestly but gently. You don't hand children bitterness. You hand them lessons wrapped in kindness. Listen to people, I'd tell them. Really listen. Even when their fears don't make sense. Especially then. Sometimes shadows still crept into familiar corners. A hallway that once felt too quiet. A door that reminded me of being locked out of my own life. But those shadows no longer frightened me. They reminded me of what I had survived. And survival, my dears, is its own kind of triumph. In my 70s, I finally allowed myself to slow down, not out of weakness but out of earned peace. I planted a small garden behind the house. Tomatoes, basil, a few stubborn roses that liked to misbehave. There was something healing about watching things grow when given time, water, and patience. I suppose people aren't so different. You can wilt from neglect. You can bend under storms. But with the right care you bloom again. Every now and then one of my daughters would ask softly, "Mom, do you ever wish things had happened differently?" And I'd smile not sadly but wisely. "Oh honey," I'd say, "if life only handed us easy roads, we'd never learn how strong our legs are." Because the truth is, if I hadn't been pushed into darkness, I might never have discovered my own light. Pain shapes us, but resilience defines us. And I chose resilience every single day. Now, as I sit here writing these memories down, I think about you, the one listening through that little screen. If you've stayed with me this far, bless your heart. Stories like this matter. The hard ones especially. They stitch us together across time and distance. They remind us we're not alone in our fear, our heartbreak, or our courage. If there's one thing I hope you take from my life, it's this. Never doubt your own voice. Never let anyone convince you your truth is imagined. Stand firm even if your knees shake. And remember, no matter your age, no matter your scars, it's never too late to begin again. Thank you, my dear, for sitting with me a while. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I've still got plenty more tales tucked away. And I'd be honored to share them with you.